Hi, I'm Gary Hamel, professor at the London Business School and director of the Management Lab, and I'd like to welcome you to a conversation with Terri Kelly. Terri is president and CEO of Gore and Associates, a global company that is renowned for its innovation and its leadership in material sciences. We're going to be talking today about the challenge of reinventing management for a new century. If you work in an organization of almost any size, you probably kind of know instinctively that our old management models are simply not up to some of the challenges that lie ahead. We live in a world today where companies must become much more adaptable as change accelerates. They must become much more innovative as the forces of competition rage around the world. And they must find ways of engaging and drawing the very best out of people in an environment where even knowledge itself is becoming a commodity and knowledge advantages are fleeting. So against all of that, we're going to talk about how do you reinvent management, root and branch. And I think that for many managers and many organizations, the most difficult thing about this is really even imagining that there could be a radical alternative to the status quo. We've been running the same kind of management processes for so many years that it just seems like this has to be this way. Indeed, I believe that if you woke up a kind of a 1960s era CEO, if we could bring that person back to life, there's some things that would surprise them in our modern organization. Certainly the pace at which business operates today, the ubiquity of information, those things would be kind of a shock, I suppose. But much would be familiar. In most companies, resource allocation still happens in the same way. People with big titles still make the big decisions. Authority trickles top down. Your share of voice depends on where you sit in the organization. And so the hierarchy is still in place. The way we make critical decisions hasn't really changed that much. But we know we need to change, and what we're looking for is examples that can inspire us, that can give us direction, that can give us hope that there really are alternatives. And that's why we're here talking today to Terri. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. A little background on Gore. Some of you will know that Gore has been sometimes rated as the most innovative company in the world. It has more than 1,000 products in many categories, from Gore-Tex, which I guess most people would know, to things you might not know, aortic grafts, membranes for fuel cells, some of the world's best-selling guitar strings, dental floss. A company of 9,000 employees, 50 years old, never a loss in 50 years, operating in more than 40 locations around the world. So truly a global company, a multinational. And yet, Terri, at that level, Gore looks like another big, materials-based company. But it has a management model that I guess you would regard as being as unique as the product it makes. And maybe where we could start is just to kind of dimensionalize that a bit for folks and talk about what would be surprising or perhaps even shocking to a CEO or somebody else who came and really started to look at how your company works, the values that drive it. What would they find that's maybe a little discomforting at Gore?
And Gary, I probably take it for granted because I've been in the company so long, but a lot of these were put in place by our founders, 50 years ago. But the ones that I think both have stood the test of time that are pretty radical, and you can imagine how radical they were back 50 years ago. One, the whole concept of we don't really want to operate in a hierarchy of the conventional command and control where decisions have to kind of make their way up the organization and back down. We operate with a very latticed organization or network so that you go to the person you need to get decisions, to get what you need to be successful in the organization. And along with that is we really try to resist titles. We have lots of people in responsible roles in the organization, but the whole notion of a title kind of puts you in a box. And worse, it puts you in a position that you have assumed authority, that you can command over the organization. And so we resist that because we really don't think that's the right way to operate. The other thing we do is, our associates, which is what we call our employees because they're, owners in the company, they self-commit to what they want to work on. So rather than your boss or your leader telling you what to do, it's very powerful to have, you decide what you're going to work on, where you can make the greatest contribution. And once you've made that, there's a high responsibility that you're going to deliver on that. So there's both sides of that coin. So those are probably the most, probably the other one that's very radical is that our leaders are there because they have followers. So rather than the typical appointment process where you have seniority or you just happen to be the best friend of the person that's currently the leader, we really try to allow the voice of the organization to be who determines who's going to be a leader based on who wants to follow them.
So let's pick those apart in a minute.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Bill Gore, the founder. Let me come back and start there. I know a little of the story. I guess he had been an engineer at DuPont for
right.
a number of years. I mean, what problem was he trying to solve when he kind of laid down the foundations for the Gore management model? Because, with all respect, you don't expect necessarily a chemical engineer to be this great management innovator, but of course he was. So kind of what was his motivation? What drove him in those early years?
So Bill Gore, who was at DuPont, he was very passionate about a novel material. So I think he saw a lot of promise in fluoropolymers. But I would say his business plan was not all that developed. But what was developed is he had some very deeply held beliefs about how you lead people and how you set up an organization. And I think what motivated him is he understood that we have to innovate. Our company will not be successful. We won't have an enterprise unless we're able to bring innovative products to the market. And so he spent a lot of time thinking about kind of the human side of that. He was influenced by McGregor and the human side of enterprise. He was influenced by Maslow in terms of how people respond, when they're not feeling safe and secure. And so a lot of those kind of philosophies really set the foundation for the company of our values and beliefs that are with us today. But fundamentally, he knew if you can't engage associates that they feel they can make a difference, that people value what they have to bring to the organization, and if you can't encourage collaboration and sharing of knowledge, you're not going to get innovation. And so that was kind of his basic premise that I think set the company in motion. But there was a clear business purpose. It was not just to create a happy work environment. It was absolutely tied to a business purpose.
To leverage this amazing new technology,
Right.
which you guys have done in countless ways. But I guess what's interesting to me out of that story is you would have never gotten to the Gore model if you would have started out benchmarking, the other big, chemical or materials giants, circa 1950s, 1960s. I mean, you couldn't have gotten where you guys are from there. Instead, he started with these kind of fundamentally new principles that came out of, you said, McGregor, Maslow, and so on. I find it interesting, Douglas McGregor, The Human Side of Enterprise, I think was written in 1960, Theory X, Theory Y.
Right.
And interestingly, here we are, all these decades later, and if you look at the data on employee engagement around the world, it's hardly changed since 1960, despite, we've talked about empowerment and engagement, and, many companies have now called them associates, team members, but it's kind of just window dressing. I think at Gore, it's a whole lot.
Right. Our language
more
is
than
important. It's very important. But one interesting story, a lot of it, certainly he learned from his experiences in DuPont as an example. When DuPont had some major project work to accomplish, they organized around task force or teams. And so Bill had the opportunity to operate in one of these task force. And he said they behave so differently. They actually drive to work together. They work around the clock to get something done. They get to know each other. And his philosophy was, why can't we put that to work and have a whole company always work that way? So you've got kind of a collection of task teams. So there are pieces of his history that he kept bringing and refining as he put the company and the philosophy together.